Andy Martino from SNY has navigated the entire stadium, and Don and Peter, he finally found a rat-infested studio here.
Nice.
It's weird, Michael. As you know, I've been coming here for years. I always pictured you doing this in the broadcast booth, but no, here we are.
Yeah.
I haven't seen any
Beautiful,
rats
isn't it?
yet, but I wouldn't be surprised.
It's beautiful, isn't it?
Yeah, oh yeah.
Yeah, it's spacious.
It's a glamorous life we live.
Yes, it is. So I've read your book, The Yankee Way. It's out today. And it spans, Brian Cashman coming here as an intern and all the way to today. And I think it's brilliant. And as I said in the blurb that I wrote, I've been here all those years, and I was reading and go, I didn't know that.
Right.
So, did anything surprise you as you were researching this?
Well, I really appreciate you saying that, because you have been here all these years, and I've always looked at you as someone who knew everything there was to know about the team. So surprising you by your account was very flattering. So thank you for that. There was plenty surprising. I learned about the ultimate falling out between Brian Cashman and Joe Torre. I didn't know the full story to that. There were details of Brian and Jeter and A-Rod, and details of the Judge contract and all those kinds of big picture things. But Michael, if there's one element that surprised me the most and I got the most pleasure from, it was tracing the baseball operations of this organization. Kind of the nerdy part of this book. Well, I'll start from the beginning. One of the reasons I wanted to do this is Brian has always said, and you've probably heard this too, the story that is always told about the Yankees is wrong.
Right.
So what's a reporter going to think when they hear that question?
Well, what's the right story?
Exactly. So I pestered him on that for quite a while. And it turns out that in his view, if I'm going to summarize this, it's that the top line story's always been told, obviously, Torre, Jeter, even Stick Michael, who Brian doesn't want to take anything away from. But he has been walking around feeling like people like Bill Livesey, who designed the Yankee Way with Mark Newman in player development, Brian Sabian, who's now back, of course, after a Hall of Fame caliber stint with the San Francisco Giants, others who are even less well-known, a guy named Mitch Lukovitz in baseball ops, who I'm sure you remember from the late 80s, early 90s. They designed a binder called the Yankee Systems Development Manual, the Yankee Way. Interestingly enough, Pat Rossler, who's back, was one of the architects of that too, and updating it through the 90s.
The assistant hitting coach now.
That's right. So their continuity and their philosophies in baseball ops, there is no other organization that can rival that. However a fan feels about Cashman, the Yankees, what they do, what is an indisputable fact is that their continuity stretches back. You could say from the day they acquired Stick Michael from the Dodgers in '68. You could say from the day a guy named Jack Butterfield, another unsung hero, met George Steinbrenner in '77. He brought in Bill Livesey. And from there is the key to why the Yankees traded for Harrison Bader, replaced Luke Voigt with Anthony Rizzo. We could go on, but no other organization in the sport has its roots in the 60s, 70s, and 80s to the decisions that they make now. That's the continuity they have. And being able to connect those dots, or I'll give you one more example. John McGraw mentors Casey Stengel, who mentors Billy Martin, who mentors Buck Showalter. So you've got the 1890s all the way to the 2023 Mets in those three managers. So there are traditions here. I knew they were there, but really digging them up was consistently surprising and satisfying. And then there's like the juicy stuff, but to be honest with you, Billy Epler gave me what I considered the ultimate compliment here. He said, this is a scouting book. And that was the stuff that was kind of turning me on while I was reporting it.
And Andy, you brought up the relationship that Cashman has with the fans.
Yeah.
And as we take phone calls every summer, regardless of whether they're doing well or not, is Brian Cashman this, Brian Cashman that, Brian wouldn't do this, this isn't Brian's way. But does this book reveal that it's not the Brian Cashman way, it's the Yankee way? That is Brian the face of this, or is he the brainchild of what's actually happening behind the scenes?
That's a great question, Don. Brian is the inheritor and then the modernizer of these traditions, where he got here, as you know, Michael, and everybody I think well knows this, 1986, when the Yankees and the baseball was so low-tech that he would transcribe not the voicemails but the answering machine messages from the minor league managers and write down, hey, this is Wally Moon and Prince William. Kevin Moss went 1 for 4 with a walk. To now there's high-speed cameras in every ballpark. So Brian has been here long enough to take the game and the organization from that Stone Age to the ultra-modern, ultra-data-savvy analytical age that we're in now. But he learns from Sabian. He learns from, obviously, Stick Michael. He learns from Bill Livesey, perhaps more than anybody. This guy, Bill Livesey, really, and I know you were around him, Michael. I mean, he's still around. He's in his 80s. Interviewing him for this book, opened my eyes to elements of the game that I had never seen. Brian took those things and ran with them, but I would say, Don, to your question, he's a through line more than the originator, and he wants that to be known. He doesn't want full credit. He wants these people to get credit.
It's pretty amazing in any walk of life in the entertainment industry, and that's what baseball and football and basketball is. It's the entertainment industry for anybody to have a tenure like Brian Cashman. And, Don talked about the fans, for the most part, don't like him. And we haven't won since 2009, and it's the Yankees' fault for saying championship or bust. They've had a pretty good run since 2009, but they haven't won. How's he done it? How's he kept his hand in this?
Well, not to speak for Hal Steinbrenner, but through my reporting in this book, I know that the Yankees consider this past run of 15 years or so to be successful if unsatisfying, in that what other GMs around the league, as you well know, look at Cashman, they look at him with awe in the sense that you've never had a losing season? How is that possible? Billy Beane said to me, Mr. Moneyball, in an interview for this book, I said, do you think Cashman's a future Hall of Famer? And he yelled at me. He said, how dare you even ask that? That's a ridiculous question. Every time you mention this man's name, future Hall of Famer should be the first thing that comes out of your mouth. And I think the Yankees internally view Cashman as someone who's really helped to steward them through that kind of consistent winning and contention, and they are just as hungry to be back in the World Series internally as the fans are, if you all out there can believe it. They are really feeling impatient about that themselves, but I think he's been able to hang in here because the Steinbrenner family sees him as somebody who competently steers them year in and year out through industry changes, which have been so dramatic over the past couple decades, and is able to give them that continuity. The Steinbrenners value continuity, you know that, and that's why I believe and report that Kevin Reese, who's already here, is Cashman's most likely successor when Brian perhaps leaves after his current contract, because that is something that you don't throw away casually, that institutional knowledge, and combined with success. If they had a bunch of losing seasons, Hal's not that loyal, but the fact is they haven't.
We saw the audit, which I guess is still ongoing. How do you view that? Is that a lack of confidence in the direction, or just something that has to happen over time?
You know, Don, that audit, as it were, was one of the more weirdly overstated things in my own time covering the Yankees. What they did was bring in an outside firm, and they are looking at how the outside firm conducts their analytics. This is something that Michael Fishman and David Grabner in the analytics side of the organization asked for. Can we basically pay somebody to look at how they do this stuff to compare what we do? In terms of an overarching outside audit of the organization, it was meetings with the highest ranking team brass at the end of last season, which a season that, of course, Cashman called a disaster, and they continue to try to update the processes. I think one of the ways they've done that already, I was talking to Garrett Cole about this just on the last homestand. He believes that the implementation, the communication of the analytics have never been more clear and human and understandable from front office to coaching staff to player. So, Don, that's one thing that they've tweaked and looked at. But they look at themselves as a team that's been winning year in and year out. Even when they were 82-80, they salvaged a winning season. So it was reported that there was some broad, big audit, but it really wasn't the case. And frankly, Cashman and his staff resented the fact that that was perceived.
You know, no one's had a better second act than George Steinbrenner. When he got thrown out of baseball, I mean, I was here. The crowd was cheering.
Yep.
The relationship with Brian was very contentious. Very contentious, I'm sorry. And, I mean, did Brian... I can't even get this when I read the book. Does Brian dislike George, or does he love him? I mean,
oh boy, is that the question?
Yeah. I mean, how did they survive together? Why George fired people that didn't do the job a lot?
Yeah.
And there were years they didn't win the World Series, and that was doing the job for George. He never fired Brian. Was there a love between the two of them?
You know, there's a picture of George hanging in Brian's office, which is interesting because the stories that he tells in this book are very honest about a toxic workplace, one that, frankly, wouldn't fly today. Now, you can't argue, no one could argue with the success that the Yankees had while George Steinbrenner was here. I did find it interesting, and I'm sure you knew this, that he inherited from CBS the core of Guidry, Nettles, Munson. I think people don't remember that. He recruited Reggie and Catfish Hunter. he has that skill as a recruiter. So he had his strengths. There were people he treated well, as we well know, and I cover that in the book. But he was a very difficult boss. I mean, look at Bob Watson in '96. He wins. By '97, he's in his office eating takeout and watching soap operas. And Brian was like, when I asked him, he was like, well, that's true, but don't let that reflect poorly on Bob. He was a great man, and every time he walked out of the office, he got zapped like a lab rat. So I said to Brian at that point, so when Watson quit, he said, you got a lot to think about, buddy. Are you going to take this job? I was like, well, why did you? You knew what this was. And he said, I've always thought that because I was raised in this environment that I was equipped to handle it. And it is, this guy. He is mentally and emotionally tough. I mean, he left after '05. He couldn't take it anymore when Steinbrenner's signing Sheffield and Cashman signing Vladimir Guerrero at the same time, crazy stuff like that. And he finally got George to say, okay, fine, take control of baseball operations. So I think it was a combination of George with Brian and Gene Michael understanding what he had. And I'm speaking from reporting. You were there, so feel free to disagree if this doesn't ring true to you. But from my reporting, it felt like George knew he didn't need those two guys. They were really good. And Brian knew that this was hard, but he could handle it. And, this is deep, too. His father, John Cashman, knew George when Brian was a youngster, wanted him to stay here. He's been here, Brian has, since he was 19 years old. When his deal was up after 22, one thing that's in the book that hadn't been reported before is that the search firm Korn Ferry, an executive search firm, contacted Brian, and Brian didn't reach out to them, but he did engage, and it was like maybe a little bit of thought about what else is out there for me in the world. But Aaron Judge is a free agent at that time. The Yankees just got swept by the Astros in the ALCS, and he's so loyal to this family that I can't leave him in the lurch like this, and Hal's loyal to him. So these ties are really deep. It's almost like a Tennessee Williams family where they love each other, but they can't stop arguing. Right. Something like that. So I think there's love.
We're talking with Andy Martino. The book is The Yankee Way. We're going to take a brief time out. Could you say one more segment?
I would love
to. All right, so Andy will be back with us. We'll talk some about the Mets as well. Michael, Don, and Peter here with Andy Martino. Has his new book, The Yankee Way, which is out today. You could buy it. You could buy it online. You could buy it in Barnes & Noble, any physical bookstore that still exists. I'm wondering, do the Yankees go on this new dynasty if George never gets suspended?
Well, that's a great question. I'd be interested in your answer to that. We know the history of how George being gone helps to keep G. Michael from trading a Bernie Williams and Andy Pettit, a Mariano Rivera. But we also know, and this is why we're not here to totally kill George Steinbrenner, even though the workplace had a lot of toxicity in it. Perhaps, what's your answer to this, Michael? Did they need him to step on the gas at certain times to finish a dynasty that was being built when he was away?
It's a good point. I believe that he demanded excellence when he was in the building. Brian overworks because he never wanted to have an answer. He wanted to have an answer for every question George had.
Right.
So I think that George actually drove toward excellence. So he was gone for the 2 years where Gene could kind of do his thing, and then he came back, and that was the spark they might have needed. One other thing I wanted to ask you. Is Brian endorsing this book? I know you talked to him. Is this Brian's book?
Oh, no.
No.
As far as I know, Brian and I are okay. But the deal that we made at the beginning of this, it was kind of a long and semi-comical process of trying to get him to do this book or cooperate with my book, because we have a good relationship from reporter to general manager. I think he thinks my coverage is generally fair. I think he's ethical in the way he treats us. And he has great stories that he tells sometimes off the record. So I said, I'd like to write a book about your tenure with the Yankees. I think it tells a broader story of the game. And you always say the story that's told is wrong. I'd like to get it right. And the first time I asked him, he just says, okay. Awkward pause. I was like, so... is that a yes? Is that a no? I was, just thinking. And there were plenty more conversations about this for months and months and months. And finally, I got to what it was he does not want to write a memoir right now. He does not want any perception out there that he's doing a book. And that's fortunate, because it's what I wanted. I wanted to work at journalism that was independent, free to criticize. So I said to him, I'm going to talk to everyone who's ever worked for you that I can find, players, coaches, managers, agents, just to do a real work of reporting. And I'd like access to you, but you're far from the only one. And the closest I got to a yes from Cashman was, well, if that's what you're planning on doing, I don't have the right to tell you not to write a book. So I was like, good enough for me. And to his credit, once I said I'm doing this, if he wasn't thrilled, he was accessible. So we spent the next 2 years in just kind of a constant stop and start conversation, a lot of times as he was driving to the stadium. But I honored my part of it, which was, this is independent, and I'm interviewing all kinds of other people. So I appreciate that he honored his, which was to be one of the people who was accessible. But no, not his book.
Andy, you talk about the Yankee Way. How is it fundamentally different than other teams, or more thorough, or do they have the wherewithal to maybe put more money behind the way that they do it? How much different is it really than everybody else in this analytic world of baseball?
Yeah, great question, Don. I think it's different in that it is, more thorough is a good word, and the continuity that we spoke of in the previous segment is part of what makes it different, because they have, George Steinbrenner has a chance meeting with a guy named Jack Butterfield in Florida in 1977. Butterfield brings in Bill Livesey. So
and by the way, that's Brian Butterfield, the future coach's dad.
Thank you. Brian Butterfield's father. He brings in Bill Livesey, and they spend the 80s developing what is still a pretty unique and revolutionary player profile system, where you have a 5-tool player, and typically they would anyone in baseball would add up the tools, divide them by 5. Here's what you got. You have a 60 player or a 50 player. Livesey ranked those tools in order of importance and said, no. So you've got a young shortstop named Jorge Posada, but he can't run. Do you release him, or do you just take the fact that he can throw and he can receive a little bit and he's got the hit and power tools, so let's make him a catcher? And there were so many decisions like that that had to do with position changes, drafting people, retaining people, how you value people at different positions, and that is something that's endured over the years, and it's spread its tentacles through the game. It's unique in that, so Rob Thompson, the manager of the Phillies, might be the best team in baseball right now. He's still using a lot of these philosophies right now in Philadelphia. It's so widespread, these ideas, that last year the Mets were implementing these because they had Billy Epler and Buck Showalter. The Mets are not intending to hire the Yankee Way. It's just everywhere. So those guys are out, and they bring in Carlos Mendoza, who was trained in the Yankee Way. So, Don, my answer to that is a lot of organizations do it. There are organizations like the Cardinals and the A's that have continuity to almost rival the Yankees, but the Yankees have been putting these things into place and modifying them, updating them for the analytical age for longer than anybody.
All right, we'd be remiss if we didn't talk some Mets with you. Obviously, the Yankee Way, go out and buy it. If you're a Yankee fan, it's great. If you're a baseball fan, it also gives you an inside look at how the stew is made, so to speak. Right. You mentioned Buck Showalter, who is very important in this book as well for the Yankee Way. He's with the Mets. He has a bad second year, a good first year. They hire this, very well-respected GM or president of baseball operations, David Stearns. So let me ask you this. I don't know if you know this or not. Why would David Stearns fire Buck Showalter without even talking to him? Why did he have Billy Epler do his dirty work? I mean, this is a guy who supposedly dots every I and crosses every T, and that's why he's so respected. Why didn't he have the decency to at least see if he and Buck were on the same page?
I think that's a very fair question for David Stearns. I don't have the exact answer to that because he hasn't answered that question. What I know is that there were a few days there after the Mets had officially hired him where he and Epler worked together. And you're right before he got there, it was Epler who did it. Steve Cohen said, it was my decision. I believe that in the sense that the organization and Buck were ready to move on from each other. And the reason, Michael, that I wasn't stunned that it happened was because being around that team, it was like, this isn't working anymore. They don't all really love each other anymore. And Billy and Buck really didn't have the most productive relationship. Cohen hadn't developed that close relationship with Buck. So it wasn't something that was necessarily going to continue. But for a new guy to come in and know he was going to do that, to sit down with him on day one.
Just pick his brain. Or give him the respect to say, hey, I'm new, we're going to go our own direction. I think you ask a fair question. It would be interesting if you put that directly to him, because when it has been put to the Mets, I can't say that a clear answer has come out of that. All right, are they in trouble? Is this a long haul in front of them? Can they turn this around quickly? Because the guy said he's going to win a championship in 3 to 5 years. It doesn't look that way.
Well, we're not on pace for that, to see that necessarily. But I believe that they have a potential superstar manager. You know Carlos Mendoza, like I know Carlos Mendoza. This is a guy with elite, like Alex Cora level leadership and court vision if they gave him the players. This year they expected to be a 500-ish team. As we know, in today's game, you can be that team, get hot, make the playoffs. Arizona Diamondbacks go on a run. They're not quite there right now, but that's not out of the realm of possibility at this point that a mediocre team can get hot and do that. I think, of course, you'd be a little concerned about Francisco Lindor batting 194 at this point in the season. A lot concerned about Edwin Diaz and his vanished confidence, fastball and slider. But this is basically how it looks. You can project a team to be 500-ish, but then when you have to watch it, you're going to have really ugly stretches like this. So I wouldn't say that what we're seeing right now is wildly out of whack with what the Mets internally projected for this season.
Is it going to come down to Cohen against Hal to get Soto?
Boy, maybe. I don't see how the Yankees can let Soto go. If it continues to go like this, you just can't. He's too perfect here. I understand that Steve Cohen he has even more resources and can bid whatever he wants, and I certainly believe that he's going to want Juan Soto. But this has been such a fit that how could you be the New York Yankees and let the Mets get him, no matter what it takes?
But Cohen has more money than the Steinbrenner family. The Yankees make more money as an organization than the Mets. So what wins?
I think my gut tells me he's going to stay a Yankee because it just feels too perfect. And you know as well as I do, when the Yankees go all in on somebody, it doesn't happen that often, maybe every couple of years. Garrett Cole, 2019. Aaron Judge, 2022. Hal does get into I will not be beat mode.
Right.
How could that not happen with Juan Soto? And I also believe that he would not say what he said to Jack Curry on Yes if he didn't feel... I don't see how he could feel totally confident because that's up to Boris and Soto too. But why would you raise that bar of expectations if you didn't have some level of early optimism that you might be able to get something done ultimately?
Are you also of the opinion that me and Don and Peter are that there's no way? I mean, Hal could say I'll talk to him during the season. They're not. I mean, no. Boris isn't going to sign him during the season. He's not going to allow it. He's four months away from everybody bidding for him.
The number would have to be so unimaginably high, right, to take him out of free agency. No, I don't. Why wouldn't you get Cohen involved if you had the chance?
Right.
One thing I'll say about Cohen covering the Mets, he knows when he's being used to drive up the price on somebody, and he actually often doesn't play ball with that. Everyone said he's going to hire Craig Counsell because he can blow away anyone financially. He made the low offer on Counsell, lower than the Brewers, not because he didn't like him, but because he's like, I'm not going to be the guy who's used to drive up.
But wasn't he used for Yamamoto?
He really wanted Yamamoto, so that he was aggressive. So that's fair to say. It was a little different because he really wanted the guy, really wanted him.
Because I heard it was the Dodgers or the Yankees.
I had heard all along it was the Dodgers and the Yankees too. I don't think the Mets were ever really in that, so he had to be aggressive financially in order to even give himself a shot. I don't think that he is if he doesn't have a feeling that he has a real shot at Soto, I don't think he's just going to bid him up for Boris's sake. So this is going to be fascinating, obviously.
It really
do you think in the long run, Andy, Mets fans will have a real love for Steve Cohen? Do you think this story ends up playing out well?
I think he's going to be a good owner, Don, because he's...
That was Peter.
Oh, excuse me, Peter. I think he's going to be a good owner ultimately because he is engaged, he's passionate, he's well-resourced. He's obviously, there's been stumbles over the first couple of years that have disappointed fans, but I think people can sense his commitment and enthusiasm. So, yes, I do. I know that the Mets have a long history of things going wrong, and that has not changed yet under his stewardship. But ultimately, if I had to predict, I do think he's going to be a good owner for that franchise.
Don, you have anything on the Mets? I know you were sitting there waiting.
I was just kind of curious, Andy, because he reached out to you after reaching out to the blogger on social media. I'm just trying to figure out the end game for Steve here. I don't think what he said was that crazy. And then the whole, I meant to DM him, and then he reached out to you to kind of correct things. What exactly went wrong there? Because he can't really honestly believe that we thought that he meant to DM him. So what is his push to talk on social media, and what exactly do you think went wrong with that whole exchange?
Well, what went wrong with the whole exchange...
Can I do something legal first?
Yes.
You're listening to 98.7 ESPN, WEPN, FM, New York. Okay, now we're all legal.
Well done. He First of all, your question about social media. He wants to be accessible and relatable to fans. I think fans have liked that for the most part. There may be some times where they wish that he hadn't, but overall, that accessibility is part of his persona that he's adopted as the owner, and I think it's authentic. He writes his own tweets. It's not some team, even though he's a guy that could have a big team around him doing things like that. In that particular case, DM or not, to me, wasn't that relevant. What was relevant to me was when I saw it, he said, basically, we can't really impact, I don't remember the exact quote, but he's like, we can't really impact anything until the trade deadline. Mm-hmm. So that, I read it that as buy or sell. That's our next chance to really change the roster. So the fact that it was sort of interpreted and aggregated that morning as Steve Cohen accidentally reveals plan to sell, that's what he wanted to clear up. He said, no, I expect to make the playoffs. That's not what I meant at all. He was frankly flabbergasted that it was taken that way. That I take at face value. Why you would fire off that reply to the tweet, I guess it's because he tries to be accessible. On that one, there wasn't the upside, but overall, I don't know, you're a Mets fan, Don. I'm a journalist, so we're in covering the team, so we're in slightly different positions on this. Do you think he's still popular with the fan base, and do you think the fan base likes the tweet?
Honestly, I think it all means nothing. I think right now the fans don't know anything about him other than the fact that he has money and he's not a Wilpon. Mm-hmm. That because of his billions, we don't have to act like we're the Kansas City Royals anymore. Mm-hmm. So I think the fact that he reached out to the fan is irrelevant because and he should have owned that tweet, Andy. I mean, it wasn't that big of a deal. I'm with you, but then it just becomes kind of a debacle. The fact that he's got to reach out to you. Oh, I meant to DM him. It just comes across as silly. Don't try so hard. You are an owner of a team. You're going to be aggressive financially. That's what the fans want. All the stuff that I'm social with the media and I have the Mets hat on, to me as a fan, that's irrelevant. I just want to know that we can act like a big market team like we are and that we can be aggressive when they're free agents and do the right thing moving forward. His popularity is going to be based on whether they win or not. So he can be out there and be nice, but does it? They didn't hate the Wilpons because they didn't speak. They hated the Wilpons because they didn't spend any money. I think ultimately, at least for me, that's what I want my owner to be. Not win a popularity contest, not to be out there glad-handing with the fans like a politician. I want them to let the baseball people or whatever sport I'm rooting for, let them do their job, and then when it's time to write the check, do it. And as long as he does that, Andy, I think he will be fine with the Met fan.
Well, there's no question that he's going to spend money on this team. It's going to be selective because David Stearns is someone who doesn't want to be jammed up by the 110% luxury tax at all times. I don't think they're going to go crazy and be drunken sailors and overspend. I think there'll be free agents that Met fans want over the years that baseball ops under Stearns doesn't recommend, and maybe that will prove wise in many cases. But they will spend money and they will be aggressive when they see a chance to win. I've gotten to know Steve Cohen enough to know that he wants, sort of like we're saying about Hal Steinbrenner, these owners, however they're perceived, I don't know. I'm in the reporting business and not so much the fan perception business, but they are both very passionate in their own ways about winning, and Cohen's going to spend to make sure that happens. All
right, we're in the middle of Diamond Notes, brought to you by London Jewelers, and before I let you go, every Met fan wants to know this. Your gut feeling, is Pete Alonso a Met next year?
My gut feeling is yes.
Really?
I don't think it's a sure thing, but I think he is worth more to the Mets in some ways you got a right-handed.
But why did he hire Boris? He wants the most money.
I know why he hired Boris, but why did Blake Snell hire Boris? Why did Jordan Montgomery hire Boris? It doesn't always work out that way. Mm-hmm. And I think we all know the kind of player that he is. He has elite power. He's an okay defender. He's a right-handed hitting guy going into his 30s. Power is his main tool. And those are not always the guys that are paid the most in the game. People like versatility, athleticism, more premium positions. So because of what he means to the Mets and the Mets fans, he does a lot of good things on the field too. To me, that could be somebody, if he doesn't get quite as much as he or Boris might have envisioned, but it's still reasonable enough for the Mets to do, I could see that still fitting. I don't think it's a sure thing. I think you could have that one owner that goes crazy.
Can they do Alonso and Soto?
They can do whatever they want, but I doubt they will because of that 110% luxury tax thing and not wanting to get stuck in that for the next decade. I think Soto comes back here to Yankee Stadium where we're sitting. I think Alonso's much more likely to go back to the Mets than to go anywhere else. But again, we'll see. Scout Boras free agency, you never know.
All right, those are Diamond Notes brought to you by London Jewelers. Visit London Jewelers today at any of their 7 locations, including the Americana Mall and the mall at Short Hills. Andy Martino, the book is The Yankee Way. I can't recommend it more highly than I'm I'm telling you right now, it's a great, great read, and not just for Yankee fans, but for baseball fans as well. Buy it where you buy books, buy it online, Amazon, the whole deal, Barnes & Noble. Andy has done a great job on this. Thanks for coming by.
Michael, thank you so much for those kind words and for having me.